The blood-red sun hung low in the Montana sky as Naomi Michaels watched the men hammer the foreclosure sign into the hard-packed earth of what had been her home for the last 7 years. Her knuckles turned white as she gripped the porch railing, the crisp autumn wind of 1887 whipping her dark hair across her tear-stained face. Just 3 weeks ago, Thomas had been alive, his laughter filling their modest farmhouse, his dreams of prosperity stretching as vast as the plains surrounding their homestead. Now he rested beneath 6 feet of cold dirt, and strangers were claiming everything they'd built together. "You've got 1 week to clear out, Mrs. Michaels," barked Harrison Wells, the bank manager, his expensive suit a stark contrast to Naomi's worn dress. "The bank's been more than generous considering your situation." Naomi stood taller, though at 27 she felt the weight of decades pressing down on her shoulders. "My husband died fighting to protect this land. The deed is in my name as well as his. You have no right." "I have every right," Wells interrupted, unfolding papers from his breast pocket. "Your mortgage payments were already 3 months behind before poor Thomas had his unfortunate accident. The bank must recoup its investments." A cruel smile played on his lips. "Perhaps your father-in-law was right about women not being fit to manage property." The mention of Thomas's father, the man who had first suggested to the bank that she couldn't handle the farm alone, made her blood boil. She knew the truth. Jeremiah Michaels had always coveted their water rights, and with his son gone, he saw his opportunity. "My husband worked himself to death for this place," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and I won't let you or anyone else take it from me." Wells laughed, adjusting his hat as he prepared to leave. "Bold words from a widow, with no means and no allies, Mrs. Michaels. But the law is the law. Be gone by next Friday, or the sheriff will remove you personally." As the bank manager and his cronies mounted their horses, Naomi noticed a lone figure watching from the road. He sat tall in his saddle, face shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but she could feel his eyes on her. The stranger nudged his horse forward as the bankers rode away, approaching the farmhouse with unhurried confidence. "Madam," he called out, his voice deep and gravelly, "couldn't help but overhear your predicament." "My predicament is none of your concern," Naomi replied sharply, embarrassment coloring her cheeks at having her humiliation witnessed by a stranger. The man dismounted, revealing himself to be tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and wind, but his blue eyes surprisingly gentle. He wasn't young, perhaps in his mid-30s, but he carried himself with the ease of a man comfortable in his own skin. "Owen Northrup," he introduced himself, removing his hat. "I've been riding circuit for the past few years, just passing through these parts when I happened upon your—" He gestured toward the foreclosure sign. "Disagreement." "If you're looking for work, Mr. Northrup, I'm afraid I'm in no position to offer any," Naomi said wearily, turning to go back inside. "Actually," he said, causing her to pause, "I'm looking for a place to winter. Been on the trail too long." He glanced around the property at the fields ready for harvest, the barn needing repair, the chicken coop with its sparse occupants. "Seems to me you could use an extra pair of hands, and I could use a roof. Temporary arrangement, of course." Naomi studied him skeptically. Cowboys rarely stopped their wandering willingly, and good Samaritans were even rarer in these parts. "What's your angle, Mr. Northrup?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "No angle, Mrs. Michaels, Naomi Michaels." "Mrs. Michaels, I've seen men like Wells before, They take what isn't rightfully theirs because they believe nobody will stand against them. His expression hardened. I've got no love for bankers or land grabbers. And what would you suggest? She asked, unable to keep the bitterness from her voice. That I fight the bank, the law, and my father-in-law with a pitchfork and determination? Owen looked thoughtfully at the fields. I suggest you fight them with a successful harvest, paid debts and legal standing, and I'm offering to help. Why would you help a stranger? Because my pa lost our family ranch to men like Wells, he said simply, and no one stood with him. Naomi hesitated. Thomas had been dead only 22 days. Inviting a strange man to stay would set tongues wagging across 3 counties. But she was staring down the barrel of homelessness and destitution. Before she could respond, hoofbeats sounded from the road. A group of riders approached her father-in-law Naomi Michaels and his 2 ranch hands. The old man's face was set in grim satisfaction as he took in the foreclosure sign. So they finally did it, Jeremiah called out. About time! A woman has no business trying to run a farm. His gaze shifted to Owen, eyes narrowing. Already replaced my son, have you, Naomi? Didn't take you long. Owen stepped forward, positioning himself slightly in front of Naomi. Sir, I'm just a hired hand looking for winter work. Nothing improper about that. You're wasting your time, Jeremiah sneered. This land will be part of the Michaels ranch by month's end, as it should have been years ago. Thomas was a fool to break away and try farming. Naomi felt rage bubble up inside her. Your son was brave enough to follow his own dreams instead of bowing to yours, Jeremiah. He wanted to grow things, not just raise cattle to slaughter. And look where his dreams got him, dead before 30, leaving his widow with nothing but debt. Jeremiah's cold eyes bored into her. Be reasonable, Naomi. Let the bank take it, then come work at the ranch house. I'll even let you keep a small stipend. The insult of his offer to work as a servant in the house that should have been partly hers by family right stung worse than the foreclosure. I'll fight for what Thomas and I built, she declared, with every breath I have left. Jeremiah laughed. With what? You can't handle that harvest alone. You've got no money for hired help, and the bank wants its payment in 10 days. His gaze flicked to Owen. And no drifter is going to save you. Owen stepped forward, his stance casual but his voice steel. They took her land when her husband died, he said evenly, looking directly at Jeremiah. And I say, I'll fight beside her. He turned to Naomi, something unreadable in his eyes. If she'll have my help. The declaration hung in the air, bold and unexpected. Naomi looked at this stranger, this cowboy who had no reason to involve himself in her troubles, and saw something that had been in short supply lately. Hope. I accept your offer of employment, Mr. Northrup, she said formally, ignoring her father-in-law's sputtering outrage. Room and board in exchange for help with the harvest. Jeremiah's face reddened. You'll regret this foolishness, Naomi. When the bank throws you out, don't come crawling to my door. He yanked his horse around and galloped away, his men following closely behind. When the dust had settled, Naomi turned to Owen, uncertainty flooding back. You do realize what you've gotten yourself into. We have less than 10 days to harvest 40 acres of wheat, sell it, and pay the bank enough to stop the foreclosure. 2 people against a task that would normally take 5 or 6. Owen smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. Then we'd best get started, Mrs. Michaels. Daylight's burning. As they walked toward the barn to assess the equipment, Naomi couldn't help but wonder what twist of fate had brought this man to her doorstep today of all days, and whether his arrival would prove to be her salvation or just postpone the inevitable loss of everything she loved. Owen's experienced eyes took in the farm's condition with a mixture of concern and calculation. The wheat fields looked promising, golden and heavy with grain, but the harvesting equipment needed work. Thomas's old reaper had clearly seen better days. "Can you repair machinery?" Naomi asked, watching as Owen examined the rusted blade mechanism. "Been fixing things since I was knee-high to a grasshopper," he replied, already rolling up his sleeves. "My pa believed a man should know how to mend what's broken." There was a hint of sadness in his voice as he mentioned his father. "This reaper needs work, but it's not beyond saving." While Owen set to work on the equipment, Naomi prepared a simple supper from her dwindling stores. As dusk fell, they sat on the porch with bowls of bean stew, the vast Montana sky painted in purples and pinks above them. "You said you've been riding circuit," Naomi ventured, breaking the comfortable silence. "What brought you to this part of Montana?" Owen took his time answering, stirring his stew thoughtfully. "Been working my way north from Wyoming. Spent last winter breaking horses for a ranch near Cheyenne, summer herding cattle in Idaho." He glanced at her. "Truth is, I haven't stayed in one place more than a season since the war." "You fought?" she asked, noticing for the first time a certain rigidity in his posture that spoke of old injuries. He nodded. "Union Army, joined up in '63 when I was 18, caught a bullet at Cold Harbor in '64. His hand unconsciously moved to his left shoulder. "Came home to find my mother dead from influenza and my father struggling to keep our ranch going in Colorado." "I'm sorry," Naomi said softly. "Life happens as it will," he replied with a shrug that didn't quite hide the pain behind his words. "We lost the ranch 2 years later. Pa never recovered from losing both the land and my mother. Died of heartbreak, folks said, though the doctor called it pneumonia." The parallels to her own situation weren't lost on Naomi. "Is that why you stopped today? Because of your father?" Owen set his empty bowl aside. "Partly. I know what it's like to watch something you love being taken away by men in suits with papers." His eyes met hers. "But also because it wasn't right, what they were doing to you." Naomi looked away, uncomfortable with the intensity of his gaze and the strange flutter it caused in her chest. "Well, I appreciate the help, however brief it might be. But you should know, I can't pay you unless we save the farm." "I understand the terms," he said simply. They fell silent again, the vastness of the Montana night enveloping them. For the first time since Thomas's death, Naomi felt a small measure of peace. Having someone else on the property, someone who seemed capable and determined, lifted a fraction of the crushing weight from her shoulders. "We should turn in," she said finally, gathering their bowls. "Dawn comes early and we have much to do tomorrow." Owen nodded, standing respectfully as she rose. "Where would you like me to sleep, Mrs. Michaels?" The question brought reality crashing back. Having a man who wasn't her husband staying on the property would raise eyebrows. "The barn has a small room at the back where we store feed. There's enough space for a cot." "That'll do fine," he assured her. "I've slept under the stars more nights than not these past years. A roof of any kind is luxury." As Naomi prepared for bed that night in the too-empty farmhouse, she found herself thinking about the stranger in her barn. Owen Northrup was an enigma, a drifter with educated speech, a cowboy with a soldier's bearing. She couldn't understand why he would entangle himself in her problems, yet she was desperately grateful he had. Sleep eluded her as she stared at the ceiling, the enormity of their task looming large in her mind. 40 acres of wheat, 10 days until the bank demanded payment. One broken-down reaper and 4 draft horses that had seen better days, and a man she knew nothing about as her only ally. "What would you think of this, Thomas?" she whispered into the darkness. But no answer came, just as none had come on all the lonely nights since his death. Dawn broke clear and cool the next morning. Naomi rose before first light, her body accustomed to farm hours despite her restless night. To her surprise, smoke already curled from the cook stove when she entered the kitchen. Owen stood at the ancient cast-iron range, frying salt pork in her grandmother's skillet. "Hope you don't mind," he said, nodding toward the coffee pot bubbling on the back of the stove. "Figured we'd need an early start and a solid breakfast." "I don't mind," she replied, somewhat taken aback. Thomas had been a good husband, but cooking had always been woman's work in his eyes. They ate quickly, the coming day's work laid out between them like a battle plan. Owen had already assessed the fields and determined which should be harvested first. "The south field looks ready," he explained, sketching a rough map on a scrap of paper. "We'll start there, work our way north. If the weather holds and we can get that reaper functioning properly, we might just make it." "And if we can't?" Naomi couldn't help asking. Owen's expression remained steady. "Then we do what we can with scythes in our bare hands if necessary. I didn't come here to give up at the first obstacle, Mrs. Michaels." His determination bolstered her own, and they set to work as soon as the morning dew had evaporated from the wheat. The reaper, thanks to Owen's mechanical skills, sputtered to life after several hours of repairs. By midday, they had cut the first rows of the south field, Owen driving the horses while Naomi followed behind, binding the wheat into sheaves. The work was back-breaking, the late September sun surprisingly hot overhead. By sunset, they had managed to harvest nearly 3 acres, a respectable start, but not nearly fast enough to complete all 40 acres in the time they had left. "We need help," Owen admitted as they collapsed onto the porch steps that evening, muscles aching and hands raw despite their gloves. "At this rate, we'll only get about a quarter of the crop in before the bank comes calling." Naomi wiped sweat from her brow, leaving a streak of dirt across her forehead. "No one will help us. Not with Jeremiah spreading talk all over the county about how I'm sure to fail." Owen was quiet for a moment, thinking. "What about the Dawson place? Thomas mentioned them once or twice when we rode together last spring." Naomi's head snapped up in surprise. "You knew Thomas?" Owen nodded. "We weren't close friends, but our paths crossed when I was working at the Sullivan Ranch last year." He spoke highly of his neighbors. To the east said they were good people who'd helped him when he first started farming. "The Dawsons are good people," Naomi agreed, her mind racing with this new information, "but they have their own harvest to bring in." "Maybe they'd be willing to work in exchange, help us now, and we help them after," Owen suggested. "Or perhaps they know others who might lend a hand for a share of the crop." The possibility of assistance rekindled Naomi's hope. "We could ride over at first light tomorrow," she said. "It's worth asking at least." As they prepared for another early night, Naomi found herself wondering about the connection between Owen and her late husband. "What else did Thomas tell you?" she asked as Owen was heading toward the barn. "When you rode together?" Owen paused, his expression softening in the twilight. "He talked about you mostly. How you gave up a teaching position in Helena to marry him and start this farm. How brave you were to leave city life behind." His smile was gentle. He was proud of what you two were building here. The words brought tears to Naomi's eyes. Sometimes I wonder if I was foolish, she admitted. My father warned me that farming was a precarious life. There's no shame in fighting for a dream, Owen said quietly, even if others call it foolish. His words stayed with her as she tried to sleep that night, her body exhausted, but her mind still racing. There was something comforting about knowing Thomas had spoken of her with pride to this man who was now risking so much to help her. It created a strange bridge between past and present, between grief and hope. Morning brought a new determination. They rode to the Dawson farm as planned, finding the family already in their own fields. Joe Dawson, a burly man with kind eyes, listened to their situation with growing concern. "Damn that old vulture Jeremiah," he muttered when Naomi explained her father-in-law's role in her predicament. Never did forgive Thomas for choosing farming over ranching. "We're not asking charity," Owen clarified, "but in exchange of labor. We help with your harvest after ours is in." Joe exchanged glances with his wife Martha, who nodded firmly. "Thomas helped us dig our well when we first arrived," she reminded her husband, "and Naomi nursed our Ellie through scarlet fever last winter when the doctor couldn't get through the snow." "We'll help," Joe decided, "and I'll speak to the Hansons and the Burks. Between us, we might be able to spare enough hands to get your wheat in before the bank comes calling." Naomi's throat tightened with emotion. "I don't know how to thank you." "No need for thanks between neighbors," Joe replied gruffly. "Though I'd pay good money to see the look on Jeremiah's face when he realizes his plan is falling apart." By the following morning, word had spread through the small farming community. As the sun crested the eastern hills, Naomi watched in astonishment as wagons approached from 3 directions. The Dawsons had been true to their word, bringing not only their own family but also the Hansons and the Burks, plus 2 hired hands from the Sullivan Ranch. "Heard you could use some help," said Eric Hansen, a Norwegian immigrant whose own homestead bordered the Dawson property. "My boys and I are ready to work." "And we brought food," added Martha Dawson, lifting a basket filled with bread, cheese, and preserves. "Can't harvest on an empty stomach." Owen organized the volunteers with the efficiency of a military commander, assigning teams to different fields, ensuring the horses were rotated to prevent exhaustion, and keeping the reaper operating despite its temperamental nature. By sunset, they had harvested nearly 12 acres, a miraculous feat compared to their previous day's progress. As the neighbors departed with promises to return the next day, Naomi found herself overwhelmed by their generosity. "I never expected this," she admitted to Owen as they watched the last wagon disappear down the road. "People respect what you and Thomas built," he replied, "and they're not fond of seeing the bank and your father-in-law try to take it away." The pattern continued over the next days, dawn to dusk labor, neighbors arriving to help, the wheat fields slowly transforming from gold to stubble as the precious grain was harvested, bound, and stacked. Owen proved tireless, working longer hours than anyone, fixing equipment when it broke, and encouraging others when fatigue set in. Naomi worked alongside him, ignoring blistered hands and aching muscles, drawing strength from his unwavering determination. She began to notice small things about him, the way the corner of his mouth quirked up when he was pleased, how his eyes crinkled when he laughed, the gentleness with which he handled the horses despite his obvious physical strength. On the 6th day, as they were taking a brief rest beneath the shade of an old oak tree, Owen suddenly tensed, his gaze fixed on the road leading to town. "Riders coming," he said, standing swiftly. 5 of them. Naomi shaded her eyes against the midday sun, her heart sinking as she recognized the lead horseman. "Jeremiah," she said grimly. "And it looks like he's brought the sheriff with him." The neighbors paused in their work as the riders approached. Sheriff Taylor, a tall man with a bushy mustache and an uncomfortable expression, rode slightly behind Jeremiah. Flanking them were 2 of Jeremiah's ranch hands and a man Naomi recognized as Hughes, the banker Wells's assistant. "What's this gathering about?" Jeremiah demanded as they drew up to the field's edge. His cold eyes took in the half-harvested wheat and the assembled neighbors. "Having a harvest party on soon-to-be Michaels' ranch land." "We're helping a neighbor in need," Joe Dawson replied, stepping forward. "Something you might try sometime, Jeremiah." The old rancher's face darkened. "This farm is being foreclosed on. Anyone helping this woman is interfering with bank business." He turned to the sheriff. "I want them removed from my property." "It's not your property yet," Owen countered calmly, moving to stand beside Naomi. "And it won't be if Mrs. Michaels can pay what's owed." Hughes, the bank man, cleared his throat nervously. "Mrs. Michaels is significantly behind on her payments. The bank has legal right to foreclose unless the full amount of $687.32 is paid by Friday." "And we intend to pay it," Naomi declared, standing taller despite her exhaustion. "The wheat is being harvested as we speak. Once it's sold—" "You'll never get it all harvested, threshed, and sold by Friday," Jeremiah interrupted with a dismissive wave. "Don't be naive, girl." Sheriff Taylor shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Jeremiah, the law says she has until Friday. If these folks want to help her try to meet that deadline, there's nothing illegal about it." "The law also says trespassers can be removed," Jeremiah countered, "and once the bank forecloses, this land is mine through legal purchase." "Until Friday," the sheriff repeated firmly, surprising everyone with his backbone. "I won't be removing anyone who's been invited by the current owner." He tipped his hat to Naomi. "Mrs. Michaels, you have until sundown Friday. I wish you luck." With that, he turned his horse and began riding back toward town. Jeremiah's face contorted with rage. "You're making an enemy of the most powerful man in the county, Taylor," he shouted after the departing sheriff. Getting no response, he turned his fury on Naomi and Owen. "This isn't over. You'll fail, and when you do, I'll make sure you regret crossing me." As Jeremiah and his men rode away, Naomi released a shaky breath. "He'll try something else," she predicted. "Jeremiah never gives up when he wants something." Owen nodded grimly. "Then we'd best work faster and keep our eyes open." The encounter with Jeremiah and the sheriff added urgency to their already frantic pace. The neighbors redoubled their efforts, working from first light until well after dusk. By Thursday evening, they had harvested 35 of the 40 acres, a miraculous accomplishment, but still not enough. The wheat needed to be threshed, transported to town, and sold before the bank's deadline the following day. "We'll never make it," Naomi whispered to Owen as they tallied their progress that night. "Even if we could harvest the last 5 acres by morning, we can't possibly thresh and sell it all by sunset tomorrow." Owen's face was drawn with fatigue, but his eyes remained determined. "We need to focus on what we have," he said. "Let's start threshing tonight, work in shifts. If we can get the first wagons loaded before dawn, they can reach town by mid-morning." Through the night they worked, the neighbors taking turns at the hand-crank threshing machine, separating grain from chaff under the light of lanterns and the harvest moon. Children too young to help with the heavy work turned the crank while their parents caught a few hours of sleep. Owen seemed to be everywhere at once, loading wagons, maintaining the equipment, encouraging the weary workers. As dawn broke on Friday, their final day, the first wagons were ready to depart for town, loaded with precious sacks of wheat. Joe Dawson and Eric Hansen volunteered to drive them, promising to negotiate the best possible price with the grain merchant. "We'll get every penny we can," Joe assured Naomi. "Old man Peterson owes me a favor anyway." The remaining workers continued harvesting the last fields and threshing what had already been cut. By noon, 3 more wagons were headed to town, carrying what they hoped would be enough wheat to satisfy the bank. Naomi worked alongside Martha Dawson, her hands bleeding despite her gloves, her back screaming in protest with every movement. Only the knowledge that this was her last chance to save her home kept her going. Occasionally she would catch Owen watching her, concern evident in his expression, but neither of them could afford to rest. As the afternoon waned, Joe returned with the first empty wagons and the first payment from the grain merchant. "Peterson gave us a fair price," he reported, handing Naomi a bank draft. "Said he'd take all we can bring him today. This is for the first 3 loads. Naomi stared at the paper in her trembling hands. "It's not enough," she said, her voice hollow. "We need almost twice this much." "The other wagons are still being unloaded," Joe reminded her, "and Hansen's negotiating for an advance on the rest of the crop." But time was running short. The bank would close at 5 o'clock, and the sun was already beginning its descent toward the western mountains. Even if they received payment for all the wheat they'd harvested, they might not make it to town in time. At 3 o'clock, with no sign of the other wagons returning, Owen made a decision. "I'm riding to town," he announced, already saddling his horse. "We can't wait any longer." Naomi looked at the bank draft in her hand, representing less than half of what they needed. "It's not enough, Owen. Wells won't accept a partial payment." "We don't know what the others have gotten for the rest of the wheat," Owen countered, "and I'd rather be there fighting to the last minute than waiting here for defeat." Something in his unwavering determination gave Naomi courage. "I'm coming with you," she declared. "It's my farm, my fight." They rode hard, pushing their horses to the limit, the miles between the farm and town disappearing beneath pounding hooves. As they thundered down the main street, the clock on the courthouse showed 10 minutes to 5. The bank stood at the far end of the street, its imposing facade a symbol of the power it held over the small farming community. Just as they dismounted, Eric Hansen came running from the grain merchant's office, waving a bank draft. "Naomi, we sold it all. Peterson paid top dollar when he heard why we needed the money quickly." Naomi's hands shook as she counted the combined amount from both drafts. It's almost enough," she said, her voice catching. "We're still $30 short." Owen's jaw set in determination. "Let's talk to Wells anyway. Maybe he'll accept what we have with a promise for the rest." They entered the bank with just 5 minutes to spare, finding Wells already putting on his coat, preparing to leave for the day. His expression soured when he saw them. "Mrs. Michaels," he said coldly, "I trust you've come to accept the inevitable and hand over your deed willingly. It would save us all some unpleasantness tomorrow." Naomi stepped forward, placing the bank drafts on his desk. "I've come to pay what I owe, Mr. Wells." The banker's eyebrows rose as he examined the papers. For a brief moment, Something like disappointment flashed across his face before he composed himself. This is unexpected, but I'm afraid it's not the full amount. The bank requires complete payment of $687.32 to stop the foreclosure. We're only $30 short, Naomi argued. Surely the bank can extend a small courtesy given how much we've managed to raise in just 1 week. Wells's smile was cold. Banking is not about courtesy, Mrs. Michaels. It's about contracts and obligations. You're short, which means the foreclosure proceeds as planned. He glanced at the clock. And now, if you'll excuse me, it's closing time. Owen stepped forward, his presence suddenly filling the small office. The lady is offering you nearly $700. Only a fool or a man with ulterior motives would refuse it. Wells bristled. Are you accusing me of something, Cowboy? I'm saying it makes no business sense to refuse this payment unless you've already promised this land to someone else. Owen's eyes narrowed. Someone like Jeremiah Michaels, perhaps? A flush crept up Wells's neck, confirming their suspicions. My arrangements are none of your concern. The fact remains, Mrs. Michaels is short on her payment. The law is clear. The bank door opened, and Sheriff Taylor stepped in, removing his hat. Evening, folks. Just checking if everything's settled before I head home for the day. Wells straightened, clearly relieved by the interruption. Sheriff, I'm glad you're here. These people are harassing me after business hours. Please escort them out. The sheriff's gaze moved between Naomi's desperate face and Wells's smug one. Have you brought the payment, Mrs. Michaels? We're $30 short, she admitted, but we've raised over $650 in just 1 week. Surely that counts for something. Taylor scratched his chin thoughtfully. Seems to me a bank would normally work with a customer who's made such an effort. He looked pointedly at Wells, especially when refusing might suggest some impropriety. Wells's face reddened further. What are you implying? Just that Jeremiah Michaels was in my office yesterday, mighty confident that he'd be taking possession of the Michaels farm tomorrow. The sheriff's voice was casual, but his eyes were hard. Almost as if he had some inside assurance the foreclosure would proceed no matter what. A tense silence filled the room. Wells fidgeted with his watch chain, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. I'll cover the difference, Owen said suddenly, reaching into his vest pocket and extracting 3 gold eagles. He placed the $10 coins deliberately on the desk beside the bank drafts. That should settle the account in full. Wells stared at the money, trapped. With the sheriff watching, he could hardly refuse the payment without confirming their suspicions of collusion with Jeremiah. Very well, he said finally, his voice tight with suppressed anger. The payment is accepted. I'll prepare a receipt. He moved to his ledger, recording the transaction with sharp, angry strokes of his pen. Outside the bank, Naomi could hardly believe what had just happened. We did it, she whispered, tears of relief streaming down her face. We actually saved the farm. Owen smiled, the tension of the past week finally easing from his shoulders. You saved it, Naomi. Your determination, your neighbor's loyalty, I just helped a little. A little? She echoed incredulously. Owen, you worked harder than anyone, and those $30. I don't know how to thank you. You don't need to thank me, he said softly. Seeing you keep your home is thanks enough. As they mounted their horses to return to the farm with the good news, Naomi studied Owen's profile in the golden light of sunset. In just 1 week, this stranger had become something else entirely. Someone she trusted, someone she admired, someone who stirred feelings in her she'd thought had died with Thomas. "Will you still leave?" she asked suddenly, the question escaping before she could reconsider it. "Now that the harvest is in." Owen looked at her, something warm and questioning in his gaze. "That depends," he said carefully. "Is there a reason for me to stay?" Naomi's heart hammered in her chest. The farm still needs work. Winter preparations, repairs. She hesitated, then added more softly, "And I've grown accustomed to having you around." A slow smile spread across Owen's face, reaching all the way to his eyes. "Then I reckon I could stay a while longer, Mrs. Michaels. At least until winter sets in." The ride back to the farm was filled with a new kind of tension, not the desperate urgency of their earlier journey, but something electric and unspoken between them. The neighbors had gathered at the farmhouse, anxiously awaiting news. When Naomi announced their success, cheers erupted and an impromptu celebration began. Someone produced fiddles and harmonicas, and soon music filled the autumn night. As darkness fell completely, lanterns were lit around the yard, creating pools of golden light where couples danced on the packed earth. Martha Dawson had organized food from everyone's contributions, laying out a harvest feast on tables made of planks and sawhorses. Naomi found herself watching Owen as he spoke with Joe Dawson and the other farmers, accepting their congratulations with humble grace. He had shed his customary reserve, laughing and joking with the men who had become his comrades during their week of shared labor. "He's a good man," Martha said, appearing beside Naomi with 2 cups of cider. "Not many would have done what he did for a virtual stranger." "He's not a stranger anymore," Naomi replied softly, accepting the cider. Martha's knowing smile made Naomi blush. "No, I don't suppose he is." The older woman patted Naomi's arm. "Thomas would want you to be happy, you know. He wouldn't expect you to mourn forever." Before Naomi could respond, Owen approached, looking somewhat self-conscious in the festive atmosphere. "Mrs. Michaels," he said formally, though his eyes held a warmth that belied his tone, "I believe this celebration calls for a dance. Would you do me the honor?" Naomi felt heat rise to her cheeks as she placed her hand in his outstretched one. "I'd like that very much, Mr. Northrup." As he led her into the circle of dancers, Naomi was acutely aware of the neighbors watching them with approving smiles. Normally, such attention would have made her uncomfortable. A widow dancing so soon after her husband's death might raise eyebrows. But tonight, after everything they had accomplished together, it felt right to celebrate life and possibility. Owen proved to be a surprisingly graceful dancer, guiding her through the lively reel with confident steps. When the music slowed to a waltz, he drew her closer, one hand resting lightly at her waist, the other holding hers with gentle firmness. "I never thanked you properly," Naomi said, her voice low enough that only he could hear. "Not just for the money, but for believing this was possible when everyone else, even me, at times thought it was hopeless." Owen's eyes held hers, serious despite the celebration around them. "I meant what I said that first day. I've seen what happens when good people lose what they've worked for. I couldn't stand by and watch it happen again, not when there was something I could do." "Is that the only reason you stayed?" she asked, suddenly needing to know. His step faltered slightly, and for a moment Naomi feared she had been too forward, but then his hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her waist. "No," he admitted quietly, "not the only reason." The simple acknowledgment sent a thrill through Naomi that had nothing to do with their victory over the bank. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt truly alive again, aware of her beating heart, the warmth of Owen's hand against hers, the possibility of a future she hadn't dared imagine a week ago. The celebration continued late into the night, neighbors reluctant to end this moment of community triumph. When the last guests finally departed, Naomi and Owen stood on the porch, watching as the wagons disappeared down the moonlit road. "You should get some rest," Owen said, noticing how Naomi swayed slightly with exhaustion. "It's been a long week." "The longest," she agreed, "and yet somehow not long enough." His questioning look prompted her to continue. "A week ago you were a stranger riding past my farm. Now—" She gestured helplessly, unable to find words for the transformation that had occurred. "Now?" Owen prompted gently. Naomi took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Now I can't imagine this place without you." The confession hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Owen stepped closer, close enough that she could see the varied blues in his eyes even in the dim porch light. "Naomi," he said, her name sounding different somehow on his lips. "I've been wandering since the war ended. Never stayed anywhere long enough to put down roots. Never wanted to." His hand reached up, hesitating before lightly touching her cheek. "Until now." The touch of his fingers against her skin was electric, sending warmth cascading through her. "What are you saying, Owen?" "I'm saying I'd like to stay if you'll have me, not just as a hired hand, but—" He paused, searching for words. "I know it's too soon. You're still grieving Thomas, and I respect that. I'll give you all the time you need. But I want you to know that what I feel for you is more than just concern for a widow in trouble." Naomi's heart pounded so loudly she was certain he must hear it. Part of her felt guilty. Was it disloyal to Thomas to feel this way about another man so soon? But another part, the part that had fought so hard to save this farm, recognized that life must continue. Thomas would not have wanted her to live in perpetual mourning, especially not when she had found someone who looked at her the way Owen did now. "I don't know what happens next," she admitted. "This is all so unexpected. But I do know I'm not ready for you to leave." Owen's smile was gentle, understanding. "Then I won't. We can take things slowly, day by day. The farm needs work before winter sets in, and I promise to help with the Dawson's harvest next. That gives us time to figure things out." The practical approach was comforting, giving structure to the uncertain emotions swirling between them. "One day at a time," Naomi agreed, returning his smile. As Owen bid her good night and headed toward the barn, Naomi entered the farmhouse with a lightness in her heart she hadn't felt in months. The home that had seemed so empty after Thomas's death now felt full of possibility again. Whatever grew between her and Owen would take time and nurturing, like the crops they had just harvested. But for the first time since becoming a widow, Naomi allowed herself to imagine a future beyond mere survival. The weeks that followed brought a new rhythm to life on the Michaels farm. True to his word, Owen stayed, helping with the remaining harvest work and beginning the repairs that had been neglected during Thomas's illness and after his death. They worked side by side to prepare the farm for winter, patching the barn roof, sealing drafts in the farmhouse, and stocking firewood. As promised, they also helped the neighbors who had come to their aid, spending days working the Dawsons' fields and assisting the Hansons with a troublesome well. The sense of community that had crystallized during the race to save Naomi's farm continued to strengthen, with Sunday dinners rotating between homesteads and frequent visits back and forth. Through it all, Owen and Naomi grew closer, their relationship developing naturally through shared work and quiet evenings. He remained in the barn room, mindful of proprieties and respectful of her still fresh grief. But the attraction between them was undeniable, growing stronger as autumn deepened toward winter. On a crisp November evening, as the first snow dusted the distant mountains, Naomi sat on the porch despite the chill, wrapped in a woolen shawl. Owen joined her after finishing the evening chores, sitting close enough that his warmth reached her through the cooling air. "Penny for your thoughts," he said, noticing her pensive expression. Naomi smiled. "I was thinking about Thomas, actually. Today would have been our 8th wedding anniversary." Owen's face softened with understanding. "I'm sorry. Would you prefer to be alone?" "No," she said quickly, touching his arm to prevent him from rising. "That's just it. I don't want to be alone." And I realized I don't feel guilty about that anymore. She looked out at the farm they had saved together. Thomas loved this land. He poured his heart and soul into making it thrive. I think he would be glad it's still here, still being cared for, and that I'm not facing winter alone. Owen was silent for a moment, respecting the significance of what she was sharing. "He sounds like a good man," he said finally. "The kind who would want his wife to be happy, even without him." "He was," Naomi confirmed, "just as you are." The simple comparison hung in the air between them, acknowledging what had been building for weeks. Owen reached for her hand, entwining his fingers with hers. "Naomi," he began, his voice low and serious. "I know it hasn't been long, and I don't want to rush you. But I need you to know how I feel." He took a deep breath. "I've fallen in love with you, with your courage, your determination, your kindness, with the way you fought for this land and the life you built here." The declaration, though not entirely unexpected, still took Naomi's breath away. She looked at their joined hands, then up at Owen's face, open, honest, and a little vulnerable in a way she'd rarely seen from this strong, capable man. "I've been afraid to admit it," she confessed, "even to myself. Afraid that loving you somehow diminished what I had with Thomas. Afraid that it was too soon, that people would talk." She squeezed his hand. "But the truth is, Owen, I've fallen in love with you too." The joy that transformed his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Owen leaned closer. Their first kiss was gentle, a question and an answer in the same moment. When they parted, Naomi felt as though something that had been broken inside her had begun to heal. "I want to do this properly," Owen said, still holding her hand. "I want to court you the way you deserve, not rush because of circumstances or convenience." Naomi laughed softly. "Owen Northrup, there's nothing convenient about falling in love with a widowed farmer who nearly lost everything. You could have ridden on to somewhere much less complicated." "And missed finding the most extraordinary woman I've ever known," he countered, his smile warming her more than any fire could. "Not a chance." As winter settled fully over Montana, transforming the landscape into a breathtaking canvas of white, Owen moved from the barn into the small guest room off the kitchen. The neighbors raised no eyebrows. It was foolish for anyone to sleep in an unheated barn during a Montana winter, and Owen's devotion to Naomi and the farm had earned him the community's respect. Christmas brought a gathering at the Michaels farm, with neighbors bringing dishes and small gifts to celebrate the holiday. As Naomi watched Owen interact with the children, telling them stories of his travels and helping them build snow forts in the yard, she felt a completeness she had feared might never return to her life. That evening, after the guests had departed, Owen presented her with a small package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "It's not much," he said almost shyly as she unwrapped it, "but I wanted you to have something special." Inside was a delicately carved wooden box, its lid inlaid with a design of wheat stalks and wildflowers. "Owen, it's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth surface. "Did you make this?" He nodded. "During those long evenings in the barn before the snow came. Open it." Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, was a ring, a simple silver band set with a small but perfect pearl. "It was my mother's," Owen explained, "the only thing of hers I kept after we lost the ranch." He took her hand, his expression solemn. "Naomi Michaels, I never expected to find a home again, much less a woman I wanted to share it with. But from the moment I saw you standing on this porch, refusing to give up what you loved, something changed in me." He took a deep breath. "I'm asking if you would do me the honor of becoming my wife, not to replace what you had with Thomas, but to build something new together." Tears filled Naomi's eyes as she looked at the ring, then at the man offering it to her, this man who had appeared in her darkest hour and fought beside her without hesitation. "Yes," she whispered, her voice catching. "Yes, Owen, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, then drew her into a kiss that promised a lifetime of partnership, Naomi felt the final piece of her heart heal. The farm that had nearly been lost would continue, becoming the foundation for a new life neither of them had imagined possible just months before. They were married in the spring, as the fields they had saved together greened with new growth. The small church in town overflowed with neighbors and friends who had witnessed their story unfold from desperate strangers to devoted partners in the span of a single remarkable harvest season. As they exchanged vows, Owen's words from their first meeting echoed in Naomi's mind. "They took her land when her husband died," he had declared that day, "and I'll fight beside her." He had kept that promise, fighting not just for her land but for her heart. And in doing so, he had helped her discover a truth about love and loss that she would carry forever. That the heart, like the land they tended, could be renewed after even the harshest season, bringing forth a harvest more bountiful than before.